We are now locked down, although we're still in masks for a little while longer. But anyway, happy days on that score. I'm Chris Hynes, Strata consultant, former commissioner, body corporate, community management. With me, as always, Frank Higginson, partner, Hynes Legal. Frank, welcome.
Hello, Chris. Hello, everyone.
We're kind of matchy today. That was not planned, but that's okay. No judgment. Thank you, everybody, for continuing to join in. Super appreciated. Really good feedback. Keep it coming. We're really keen to have that feedback. Ideas for future webinars, Frank? We are all ears on that sort of stuff. You can fire us through comments and questions today on the live chat, and afterwards we will get to that. If you've got a bit more of an involved query, you're better off sending it to the email address, which is running across the bottom of the screen. And again, as always, don't forget to like and share and sign up for reminders. That's how you find out about what's going on. What's going on today, I hear you ask? Frank, when good body corporate managers go wrong?
Yes. I'm going to be delicate about this, but I suppose it's sort of, I mean, this is all we do. So I'm nearly 30 years in law. In your 5 and a bit years as commissioner, I suppose the rationale for this one is everyone tries to do a good job. You know, it's the same as, you know, and I mean, be very careful about how we present this, but in every industry, organisation, profession, there's some people that don't do the right things. Most people don't do the wrong thing intentionally. It comes about through any number of different reasons. So, and lawyers are no different. So don't think we're throwing stones here today, but probably this, more than anything else, I think is directed at strata managers in terms of the things that we see that probably could be done better from time to time. So I'd say there's probably, there might be one or two we could point the finger at and say, you do all of these things wrong, Chris, but we'll leave them nameless.
There's very few of those.
Yeah, right? The vast majority would probably come a cropper on some of these things from time to time. Really, more than anything else, I think probably for one reason.
And what's that?
They are way too busy. They are way too busy. And I think that's the thing I say to clients. You know, we have clients ring from time to time unhappy with what's going on with their body corporate manager, and you know, I'm sure they ring their body corporate manager saying they're unhappy with what's going on with us. So again, I'm not throwing stones, but the reality is that inside a strata management business, an individual strata manager might have 50 buildings. Who knows? They might have 100. You know, it depends, and each company's different, and each organisation's different. So some structured different ways. You might have a whole bunch of really big ones. In the case of some of the really big buildings, you might only have one because it's a full-time job on its own. Probably a slight exaggeration. But if you've got 50 buildings, let's make it 52 just for the hell of it. What you have every year is 52 AGMs. What you might have is 104 committee meetings, maybe 208 if it's one per quarter, maybe even more. You might have who knows how many vote outside committees running around those individual buildings. You might have 75 individual building defect blues going on about water ingress. You might have, who knows, 600, 800 owners inside that 50 building portfolio. It could be a lot more. And all of those people have your email address.
You might also have a persistent commissioner's office in contact with them, asking them to do things. That happens too, funnily enough. I absolutely 100% agree with everything you say there, Frank. I think between you and I, we've met pretty much every body corporate manager in the state many times. The vast majority, super professional, committed, passionate. I think passionate, definitely, about what they do. And like Frank said before, this is equal opportunity stuff. We did a webinar recently about where good on-site managers go wrong. No doubt we'll do one in future about where good committees go wrong, or good owners go wrong, maybe even where good former commissioners go wrong, Frank. That could probably be a very lengthy one, I suspect.
At some stage, you're not going to be available for one of these, and I think I'm going to do one on how to get the best out of your lawyer.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, Frank. So yeah, lest anybody think that we're picking or whatever the case, this applies equally to everyone. Today we're focusing on managers though, and I guess, like we said before, the vast majority are very professional, but Frank, a bit like Bonnie Tyler, every now and then they fall apart, don't they?
I don't follow Bonnie Tyler, but there you go. Yes,
Total
absolutely.
eclipse of the heart, Frank.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, and that's that Monday morning thing, you know. So if a strata manager turns their phone off for the weekend or even has their emails on their phone, they come into thing on Monday morning, they might have 60 emails there from people. And the same as, you don't usually ring your lawyer to say, Frank, I'm really glad I bought that unit. Thanks for helping me do that. Everyone's got a whinge. So it always starts the week off badly. So probably, and this is just you'd almost say a non-exhaustive list, as much as we put a little bit of thought into it in terms of where strata managers, because of the pressure they're under and the volume of things they're dealing with, can sometimes go a little bit wrong. And I suppose I might start, Chris.
Yeah, we'll take it in turns.
Yeah, it might be. And really, I think probably one of the things is getting too attached, getting too, you know, my committee, my building. It's when you take that sort of ownership, when you're using that sort of terminology, you're not quite as objective as what you might need to be in relation to the things that are going on in that particular building. That's for me, that's always a bit of a giveaway about, hang on a minute, there might be just a little bit too much attachment to this building, and it might be because you've got wonderful personal relationships with the people, and I get that. But at the end of the day, a strata manager is exactly like we are. We're advisors to our clients. So if we start taking personal sides, in a sense, for, you know, really personal involvement with clients' problems, it can sometimes take away that objectivity, which means you're not necessarily going to give the best advice. So that's a bit of a red flag.
And then really closely related to that, the next area where managers can go wrong is getting too involved. And it's very similar to what Frank was just talking about. And this is more about taking a side, whether it's the committees, that'd be the most often, or a caretaker or owner or a certain group of owner. I think, Frank, that stems from a genuine attempt to want to do the right thing. But again, losing sight of the end game in the process. And ultimately, by doing so, that manager will lose buildings.
Yeah,
quite likely. Yep.
Absolutely. Like, I think the really good strata managers, like it or not, are Switzerland. You know, their job is to, you know, act on the instructions of the committee, act for the building as a whole, and that usually means that you're not jumping in the middle and picking and jumping on sides.
That leads very nicely to the next one, doesn't it, Frank?
It does, the peacemaker piece. So when, you know, pluck a example, an easy one, dispute in a committee. You know, there's no jurisdiction in the Commissioner's office for a committee dispute per se amongst committee members. And this is where strata managers really can come unstuck, because if you get in the middle and try to sort of act as a dispute resolution service, which I suppose is what the Commissioner's office doesn't do, or Chris, what you might do as a mediator from time to time, and you've done a couple of these with committees helping resolve issues. And I get it. You're trying to help the clients figure out what it is that's going on. The difficulty with that is you're never going to please everyone. You might get lucky, but most of the times, most mediated solutions involve a bit of compromise on either side, and no one gets exactly what they want, which means that everyone is a little bit unhappy with what's gone on. And if you've been the one that has effectively facilitated that, advised people around that, been seen to push people into it, whatever it might be, that's going to reflect on you. Now, that might be, in theory, the right thing to do, to try to sort that out from a committee perspective. But by doing that, you really are potentially risking your business relationship with your clients, because someone is not going to like you.
That's right, Frank. Next one, it's working without any instruction, or working without any clear instruction. And that might be a case where a manager is doing things in the absence of a clear direction from the committee, or where there's a lack of clarity about who on the committee they need to be dealing with, and have seen it happen where committee members are all participating and everyone comments, but no one is actually taking on the responsibility of instructing the manager. So you might have a committee that's all communicating by email, all giving their input, but no one is actually taking the responsibility to say, this is what you now need to do on our behalf to implement what we are talking about. And of course, the most basic example of that is not getting instructions in writing. There will be times when you can't take instructions in writing, of course. That would be the exception, wouldn't it, Frank?
It would. And I mean, we get this. I mean, we, back for Bodies Corporates, we get copied in on a whole bunch of committee correspondence from time to time. And I suppose, again, our relationship is slightly different where we don't have an ongoing contract for 1, 2 or 3 years. Our engagement's terminable on a moment's notice, which is fine. But when, you know, I see those, you can see the bodies corporate that are going to be the more difficult ones to deal with when all of those exchanges roll around. I'm, you know, 30 years later, I suppose you get good at managing some of these things. Really good at saying to the clients, hold your horses for a minute. Every email you copy in on, I've got to read, because if there's something in there I need to do, then I've got to do it, and it's not going to cut the mustard for me to say I didn't read it. So that means I'm going to charge you for it. So the best way to deal with me is for you guys to make your decision. I'll ask you what you need to tell me. You guys bounce around internally, and you come back to me and say, Frank, this is what we want you to do. And from my perspective, the other thing, in terms of that correspondence, got this from a lawyer mate years ago, it's an ACL, which is not an anterior cruciate ligament, but is an arse covering letter. So that is when you get instructions from someone on the phone to do whatever it is. It's reply of, dear Chris, just confirming you want me to do X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
I'll make sure that happens, yours faithfully. Then there's a record.
Dear committee, just following up what we spoke about earlier today, I confirm that you have asked me to blah, blah, blah.
Yep, because it's
regards.
It's the exact same with strata managers as it will be for us from a legal perspective with liability to clients, is that for the committee, they've got one particular issue in front of them. For the strata manager, they've got 50.
Yep.
So if there is ever a battle about who said what to who, normally the courts are going to side with the committee members because that's their only issue. It's not you. So that's why you need to make sure you've covered your backside in writing to say, this is what you've instructed me to do.
Remember, ACL, not a terrible knee injury, but something else altogether.
Yes.
Frank, I think you're the next one. Working without a well-defined agreement.
So, I mean, if you're a member of the SCA, there's a standard templated management agreement which sets out the duties and all those sorts of things. Sometimes, I suppose if you're not a member of the SCA, you're not using one of those, we do see some pretty sketchy agreements in terms of what's actually required of the strata manager. What are they actually required to do? Is it X? Is it Y? Is it Z? You know, and of course, what they're charging for it. So it is really important to document what the scope of your engagement actually is when acting for a body corporate, and then make sure you understand it and you follow through on it. I mean, it sounds simple, but it's not, because in the cut and thrust, and we get this again, there's a hell of a lot of similarities, is we might scope a job for a client at the start, and then halfway through something goes off the rails and the client says, hang on a minute, can you do this as well? And it's like, well, stop. This is what we quoted you for this. This is what that was. Here's the bit you've asked us to do. Here's the scope of work for that, and here's the fee for that.
A classic example of that, Frank, would be is there a provision in the agreement for you to get involved in an adjudication application? Because the manager will no doubt be called upon to do the distribution of that material. That is a huge undertaking in some buildings, so there needs to be provision for that just in case. You need to know what that means. The next one, a good one, this one, being a bush lawyer. Unless a manager is a practicing lawyer, they should not be giving legal advice. There's a big that goes with that, but I think that's a really good point worth reiterating. It's a huge risk, whether you are the manager in question or you are one of the people that they're purporting to give advice to. The risk there is enormous, isn't it, Frank?
It is. I mean, and you know, it's very obviously not the most objective thing for us to say. You need to get legal advice all the time, so I get that. But probably the example, Chris and I were at a session with some body corporate managers a couple of weeks ago, and one of them said, Frank, what do you actually mean by that? It's like, okay, put me on the spot. And the easiest example we gave there was, body corporate manager gets asked a question by a committee about a certain issue, they know the legislation refers to that particular issue. So, well, section 26 is where you've got to head for that. Where I think that the application of legal advice really, in a very simplistic terms, is when a body corporate manager would say, well, section 26 says X, Y, and Z. That means for you A, B, and C. And it's that interpretation that is actually the legal advice. And probably what we see with strata managers all the time is, they've had that question from a previous committee. They might have come and got advice, like a figure from us. That advice said whatever. So they just grab that and go and apply that to that particular committee. So, well, I've seen that from these guys before. But, and this is, one of the things with law is there's nooks and crannies everywhere. So, but that previous advice might have been predicated on a particular set of circumstances that had one particular thing that was different that changed it totally.
Yep.
Mate, with Sunday Waters, prime example. You can have a decision. You get that decision had an adjudicator knock over a special resolution because 2 votes had been handed in the wrong way. Yet we got this from a body corporate manager. A couple of months later, they got another decision where it wasn't knocked over when votes were handed in the same way. It's like, well, why is that? It's because that's you get different decisions with what you would think would be the same set of facts, but they're not.
Absolutely. Every situation is different, Frank. Conscious of time, so we might try and whiz through these remainder of falling apart points relatively quickly, because I think we're both keen, Frank, you and I, to get to some positive, constructive bits of feedback at the end of this. We don't want this to be a negative experience. Or too negative, anyway. I guess the next one is not value adding. So we just said body corporate manager should not be advising, but there's always an opportunity, we think, for a body corporate manager to demonstrate value above and beyond what the pure black and white says. And I think a really good way of doing that is where you've got a committee that's floundering a bit with a particular issue, struggling to understand or comprehend. If a body corporate manager can leap in and say, well, look, this is not legal advice, but I am aware of this instance where this occurred, and the feedback was this. So the learning that we all take out of it is to apply these principles. That's not advice. That's not telling anybody what to do. What that is adding a bit of value. So I am using my expertise and, most importantly, my experience to give you an idea of what you can do about it. Referrals to people who are in a position to advise, that would be another example of where value gets added. And then very closely related to that, Frank, forgetting who the client is.
Client is the body corporate, and you're instructed by the committee in relation to that body corporate. For example, the resident managers, not the client, as brutal as that might be for the resident managers that are actually watching, as much as, we've got relationships with them, but the client is the body corporate. And there's a big push to a degree about, by some, about saying that strata managers actually have a fiduciary obligation to their clients to make sure they act in their best interest at all times, which is what we have to our clients. If our interests and our clients' interest divert, we must put our clients' interest first. Full stop, end of story. Even if that means throwing ourselves under the bus. So I think sometimes, and it is this whole industry is a game of relationships, but you must remember who your client actually is and who you owe your obligations to.
Yep. Obviously, communication, Frank, we say this in pretty much every webinar, don't we? Every seminar. Communication takes a few different forms. So not responding at all, not responding in a timely fashion, either giving too much information, that's a big one, or not enough information, or responding on an emotional level. We've certainly seen examples of that from body corporate managers, where you can see that the manager has responded emotively and quickly and instinctively, but that can be really problematic, and we'll get to some answers for that kind of thing in just a moment. Probably a big one, Frank, is not staying up to date, not staying current.
It is. And look, the modules, the law changes, the Commissioner's office decisions, it's constant. It terrifies me to think of the general practice type work I used to do Anyway, stop that. So it is. I mean, these things are part of it. Obviously, there's a bucket load of other ways to do it. And I think then the thing that follows from that is not being too confident. Some of the things we see, you know, and back to that legal advice bit, strata manager might say, do this. It's like, well, that's just wrong. You know, so we do it on these webinars from time to time. I'm not exactly sure, but I think this. So it's not a bad thing to say to people, you're not actually sure and you need to go check it. But you need to have, I suppose, the level of knowledge to know that Donald Rumsfeld passed away last week. The unknown unknowns are the things that are truly terrifying for everyone. You don't know what you don't know. So the thing you need to do is to make sure you know what you don't know. And that's where you pull the trigger. Hang on a minute, I'll check that and come back to you.
Nothing worse for a body corporate manager than to be asked a question by a committee member, for example, about a legislative change or a development, and you saying, I know nothing about that. Need to try and be up to speed we can. And there are plenty of ways in which you can do it. I know it's difficult. It's a really important one. Final one that we're going to cover, and this is a pretty obvious one, I suppose, but those really kind of serious and significant moments where things go drastically wrong. And these are the very small exception, but we're talking here deliberate systemic problems, deliberate systemic breaches of legislation, things like serious financial and administrative problems occurring. Like I say, those are very much the exception. But when it happens, it's serious, and it's a huge reputational issue for body corporate managers everywhere.
The industry as a whole, absolutely.
Yep, that's right. That's a lot of potential to fall apart. Poor old Bonnie Tyler, she'd be shocked. Let's try and focus, though, Frank, on something constructive out of all of that, though. How to learn from it, how to sort of gain and move forward. And if as a manager, you're watching this or listening to this and you have been guilty, for want of a better expression, of some of those things, how do you move on from that? How do you learn from it and grow, Frank? What do you reckon?
Well, I think you start with the 24-hour rule. Talk about that a lot. Those nasty responses and that sort of thing, as much as sometimes you get caught, you know, responding. It's just that moment of reflection. And I think it really is, this industry can be very collegiate, strata managers. So the SCA is absolutely, you know, the peak industry body that organises functions and that sort of thing. But regardless of that, I mean, I still have the same thing with some lawyer mates who are in theory in competition to me, but I catch up with them, a couple of them particularly, relatively regularly, once every 3 or 4 months or so, and just shoot the breeze over lunch on a Friday afternoon about what's going on, what the changes are. But even then, I've still got one guy in particular who, if I've got something across my desk and it's like, bloody hell, what's that all about? I'll ring him and say, mate, have you seen this before? That sort of collaboration and collegiality. So you're not just a silo. Yeah, I suppose if you're in a bigger organisation and you have a bunch of strata managers around you, making sure you collaborate and you communicate and you do really share the pain, because like everything, there is pain in all of the jobs that we do. And so it makes it easier when you're part of a team, be that internal in your office or external with other friends and that around, but it's a very lonely place to do anything like this on your own.
It's really important to have someone trusted that can do a bit of quality control for you. I used to have that when I was commissioner, actually. I would draft things and then there'd be someone I would ask, is this okay? Most of the time they actually said to me, Chris, you didn't go hard enough. So anyway, that's the story.
Mate, we do that for each other now, don't we? Mate, can you check this and make sure this is okay from your end?
Yep. Absolutely. Find somebody you trust and buddy up. It's a give and take scenario. Obviously, it's about remembering what your role is, and to a certain extent, it's about forgetting what you would like and remembering what it is that you are contracted to do, and then working within those parameters. If you know your limitations, then you know how far you can go, and then you can also know, importantly, about that value add I spoke about before. So this is my limitation here, but here's a couple of opportunities I have to demonstrate value to clients along the way as well. People appreciate lines in the sand and parameters, don't they, Frank? It won't be the case that you put people off if it's clear and it's like, this is as far as I can assist you with. After that, you'll need other advice. People will actually like that, won't they?
They do. And I mean, you've got to remember too, being respectful to the committee members and lot owners that are out there, is that this can be a very unsophisticated audience of consumers. People have bought a unit and they put their hand up to get on the committee. So not trying to can anyone out there who's done that from a committee perspective. If you're watching this, you're making an effort, which is a bloody good start. Yeah. But there's a whole lot of people that don't. So from that communication and value perspective, you've almost got to start from the basis that people don't even understand what your job is. And I mean, every strata manager's had that, haven't they? When the pool's not working, someone's ringing them blowing up when they might have a resident manager, or the committee's ignored the issue, or whatever it might be. You know what I mean? It's sort of that's the audience, that's the consumers in this market. And again, we have the same things from a committee perspective. It's ongoing education and management of people's expectations is really, really important.
I think so. Then it's about, I think, Frank, celebrating and accentuating the positives. If you as a manager have achieved a good outcome, if you've helped your committee achieve, sorry, that's a possessive thing again. If you have helped one of your client committees to achieve a good outcome, celebrate it. Make sure that everyone who needs to be aware of it is aware of it. And a good example might be there's been a really tricky maintenance issue going on at the building, and there's been a lot of toing and froing about who's responsible. Maybe, you know, it starts out being relatively simple. Oh, it's this format plan, therefore it's this. And then all of these complicated factors come into it. And what you've done is you've assisted the committee with their deliberations on that. You have referred them to get advice if they need it. You've added some of your expertise based upon previous experience. You don't give advice, but you're saying, I encountered a similar situation once. And then the situation goes to a meeting and gets a tick. It's like, yep, approved, done, finished. That is something to celebrate, both for your own sake and also for the fact for your client's sake as well. I think accentuating positives, Frank, is severely undervalued in this sector.
Agree. Because that's the thing. There's very easy to negative again. Lots of whinges, but there's lots of stuff that does go right as well. It's just that we happen to deal with the whinges more often than not, which tends to tarnish your view from time to time about what the good things that do go on, the communities that actually do it well.
That's right. And on a similar theme, Frank, if ever you're in doubt about what you could be or should be doing as a manager, we reckon it's not a bad idea to refer to that whole reasonableness concept in body corporate legislation. And we've banged on about this a few times now about what might be reasonable. But Frank, it's usually the same things every time, isn't it? Transparency, methodical process, timeliness, right of reply. What have I missed there?
Making sure you've actually got all the facts and not just various different opinions, and proper communication of outcomes. You know, this is where we've got to, and this is why. And that, yeah, from a third party's perspective, someone could look at it and say, well, there's a process. Might not necessarily have led to the outcome that the person actually liked, but there's a process.
There's a lot to be said for process. Some people will go, oh God, you know, more administration, more whatever. There's a reason why there's a process in place, usually, and that's to protect the parties involved. Take every chance that you get to do CPD education and information. There's a lot of resources around to help in that regard, so take them when they are on offer. And if you get the chance to ask a question from somebody who's got a bit of expertise, ask it. The worst thing that can happen is that you get a no or a seek legal advice response. Probably one I want to really throw in there, Frank, is how a constructive one. Managers need, in my view, managers need to be out there advocating for the kind of industry that they want. I think this is a really big one. At the moment, body corporate managers in Queensland, not regulated, not licensed. If you want your industry to be regarded positively, constructively, and professionally, get out there and make sure you're involved in the process to make that happen. Because it is a process, isn't it, Frank?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it's a layer of regulation is a big decision from government. Certainly it's working towards that, but it's certainly, you know, the same as we've got You know, if it comes with its benefits. I mean, the legal profession, I suppose, is there's always been that, and probably always has been to a degree. But you know, we've got a Queensland Law Society, we've got a Legal Services Commission, which is a disciplinary body. We can get struck off if we don't do the right things. We can lose our certificates to practice if we don't do the right things. So there's a degree of accountability that comes with that probably elevates the profession above a normal job. And so if strata managers get that same level, that would be a good thing.
So don't be passive about that. Be out there, being involved in the process. We're nearly at the end. TCM, thank you for your comment, as always. And Gleno, thank you. Any thoughts on issues relating to Part 5, body corporate managers? That's a whole other webinar in and of itself, Frank, isn't it?
It would be an interesting one, actually.
Yeah. So just for everybody watching who doesn't know what that is, a Part 5 is basically when a body corporate manager takes over the running of the committee. Because there is none. Yeah, it's a bit of a convoluted process, so it does take a bit of time to go through it. Ooh, thank you. We might put that on the agenda for a future webinar. Speaking of future webinars, Frank, we've come to the end of this one, but next week, sequel time, part 2 of our exciting new Politics in Strata series. And next week, Frank, the art of gentle, or in some cases, not so gentle, persuasion. How do you get people to do what you want in a body corporate? How do you, we've talked about counting the numbers before, so next week, how do you get the numbers?
In an environment where voting is not compulsory. That's going to be fun. That will be a good one. Have to put some thought into that.
Absolutely. We don't do these off the cuff, everyone. We do actually put a bit of thought into it. Thank you, everyone. Gosh, as always, that flew by, and we had a lot of ground to cover there today. So if any of what we said raises any kind of queries, get in touch or send us a comment, and we'll see what we can do with that. As always, though, we had great engagement today, everybody. So thanks so much to everyone who takes the effort to be involved. I know you've got other stuff on. We do really appreciate the fact that you're staying around for this. With that, though, on this rather overcast Thursday arvo outside.
In Brisbane, at least. Yep.
In Brisbane, at least. Frank, as always, thank you.
Thanks, mate. And thank you, everyone, for watching yet again.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.